they weren't made in cafes. They weren't viral on TikTok. And they surely weren't served with sourdough and avocado. These sandwiches, yes, sandwiches, were born in dusty kitchens, lunch counters, and schoolhouse thermoses. Handed down from grandmothers who cooked with scraps, soldiers who fed themselves in trenches, and factory workers who needed to eat fast and cheap. Before Subway. Before paninis. Before we Instagrammed our food. There were sandwiches stuffed with sardines and onions, bananas and bacon, jelly and ham, and even cold beef tongue, each one whispering a tale of an America that no longer exists. You see, sandwiches weren't just convenient, they were survival. During the Great Depression, World War rationing, and through the post-war boom, women got creative with whatever was left in the pantry. These were not luxury meals, they were food alchemy. Peanut butter met pickles. Liverwurst was dressed up with horseradish. Boiled ham was sweetened with raisins. And nothing ever went to waste. But somewhere along the way, we forgot. These 30 sandwiches are more than just quirky recipes from old cookbooks. They're a breadcrumb trail through history. A look at how America ate, adapted, and made do with what it had. So today, we invite you to take a bite of the past. We're dusting off the pages, peeling back the wax paper, and revealing 60 sandwiches that once ruled lunchboxes, factory floors, church basements, and kitchen tables across the nation. Because once you see what we used to eat, you'll never look at your plain turkey sandwich the same way again. You're probably thinking, peanut butter and what? But back in the 1930s, this oddball pairing wasn't a joke, it was a Depression-era staple. At a time when meat was scarce and grocery budgets were tight, creative cooks across America started turning to shelf-stable ingredients to build their meals. And out of that necessity, the peanut butter and pickle sandwich was born. Why did it work? Simple. It hit all the right notes. Creamy. Tangy. Sweet. Salty. Crunchy. Peanut butter provided protein and fat, cheap, filling, and non-perishable. Pickles added acid and bite, cutting through the richness like a flavor bomb. You could find this sandwich in school lunchboxes, factory break rooms, and even church potlucks. Mothers would spread peanut butter on white bread, layer it with thin dill pickle slices, and send kids off with what seemed like a poor man's gourmet lunch. Some recipes added a dash of mustard for extra zing. Others swapped in bread and butter pickles for sweetness. The result? A strangely satisfying sandwich that once you try it, you never quite forget. In fact, this combo got so popular that during World War II, some mess hall cooks kept it in rotation. Why? It didn't spoil fast, it was easy to make in bulk, and most soldiers grew up eating it. Today, you won't find it in cafes or on brunch menus. But in vintage cookbooks and mid-century lunch guides? It's right there, quietly waiting to be rediscovered. Because back then, food wasn't just about taste. It was about making do. And making it count. If there's one sandwich that perfectly captures old-school working-class grit, it's the sardine and onion sandwich. Once a common sight in lunch pails from the 1910s through the 1950s, this pungent, powerful pairing was considered a no-nonsense meal, high in protein, long-lasting, and dirt cheap. Back then, sardines were everywhere. Packed in oil or mustard sauce and sold by the tin for just a few cents, they were a staple in pantries across America. Add a few slices of raw onion, some vinegar, maybe a dash of pepper, and you had yourself a sandwich that stuck with you through a 12-hour shift. Miners, factory workers, shipyard men, they all knew it. It wasn't fancy. But it filled you up, and it didn't need refrigeration. Some variations called for rye bread. Others added a smear of butter or mustard. Immigrant families brought their own twists, from Italian-style sardines with capers, to Scandinavian open-faced versions on dark bread. In many communities, this sandwich carried cultural weight. It was passed down, not because it was trendy, but because it worked. It was economical. It was tough. And if you liked bold flavor, it hit like a freight train. Sure, today it might get you some strange looks. But a century ago, it was considered a solid lunch and a smart one. Especially during the Depression and war years, when every meal had to count. So next time you crack open a tin of sardines, don't underestimate the sandwich that helped build cities and keep families going through hard times. Because this wasn't just food. It was fuel. It sounds bizarre today. Ham and jelly? But once upon a time, this sweet and savory sandwich was a popular pick, especially in Southern households and vintage school lunch menus. The idea may surprise modern palates, but the concept goes way back. Pairing meat with something sweet isn't new. Think glazed hams, cranberry sauce with turkey, or chutney with roast pork. The ham and jelly sandwich was simply the everyday version of that culinary tradition. Starting in the 1920s and peaking through the 1950s, this sandwich showed up in cookbooks, homemaker guides, and even army rations. It was easy, cheap, and endlessly adaptable. Here's how it worked. A slice or two of cold, cooked ham, usually leftovers, placed between two slices of bread, with a generous layer of jelly spread underneath. Grape jelly was the most common, but some recipes called for apple, currant, or even pepper jelly for a little kick. The sweetness balanced the saltiness. The jelly kept the bread from drying out. And the ham gave its substance, a perfect quick lunch with no need for mayo or mustard. For Depression-era families, it was a way to stretch expensive meat with something cheap from the pantry. For kids, it was a fun twist on the usual sandwich lineup. And for wartime cooks, it was efficient and shelf-stable, no refrigeration required if the ham was canned. Today, it might raise eyebrows. But back then, it made perfect sense. It was practical, it was resourceful, and for many, it was delicious. Sometimes, the past isn't just strange. It's surprisingly smart. Some sandwiches are born from tradition. Others? From pure American experimentation. And the banana and bacon sandwich? That one's somewhere in between. Though often linked to Elvis Presley, who famously added peanut butter and sometimes fried the whole thing in butter, this combination was already floating through Southern cookbooks as early as the 1930s. It started with simplicity. You had leftover bacon. You had ripe bananas. You were hungry and working with what you had. Sweet met salty. Soft met crispy. And what could have been a mess became a masterpiece. In most old recipes, the sandwich wasn't fried like the Elvis version. It was served cold, lightly toasted bread, a smear of butter or peanut butter, crisp bacon strips, and slices of banana, usually mashed gently to help everything stay in place. This sandwich was especially popular in farming towns and with working-class families in the South. Bananas were cheap and available. Bacon was flavorful but used sparingly, just enough to season. And when packed for lunch, it kept surprisingly well. It offered a surprising amount of energy too: potassium, fat, protein, and sugar, making it a favorite for long workdays or school lunches. Over the decades, the sandwich became a curiosity, fading from menus but never completely from memory. And with the rise of Elvis in the 1950s, it earned a cult following, though his version took things to an entirely new level of decadence. But strip it back to its roots? It's a sandwich that reflects a time when creativity mattered more than convention. And flavor was discovered through necessity, not recipes. To modern ears, cold tongue sandwich sounds like a culinary dare. But 100 years ago, it was a prized dish, especially among immigrant families and upper-class luncheons alike. Beef tongue, once a staple in both European and American kitchens, was prized for its rich flavor, tender texture, and surprisingly, its affordability. It may have looked unusual, but in the days before supermarkets and processed meats, Cooks knew how to use every part of the animal, and tongue was considered a delicacy when prepared right. The process was simple, but slow. Boil the tongue with onions, bay leaf, and peppercorns until perfectly tender. Peel the skin, chill it, and slice it paper-thin. Then layer those slices on rye or white bread, often with a sharp mustard, horseradish cream, or even pickled vegetables. In Jewish delis of New York, German immigrant homes in the Midwest, and Victorian tea rooms, this sandwich was a lunchtime fixture, refined, filling, and unmistakably old world. It wasn't just about flavor, it was about frugality and respect. No cut was wasted. And nothing tasted quite like tongue, subtly beefy, buttery soft, and made for slicing cold. You'd find it wrapped in wax paper for picnics, served at post-church gatherings, or offered in railcar dining menus across early 20th century America. But as post-war convenience foods took over and taste shifted, tongue quietly disappeared from most homes and sandwich shops. Today, it lives mostly in memory and the occasional vintage cookbook. Once a symbol of smart, resourceful cooking. Now, a sandwich that dares to be remembered. It sounds like something a toddler might invent. But the tomato and peanut butter sandwich was once a lunchtime regular across America's kitchens, especially during the 1930s and 40s. Back then, peanut butter wasn't just for kids. It was packed with protein, shelf-stable, and incredibly cheap. Tomatoes? They were easy to grow, available in backyard gardens, and abundant in late summer. Put the two together, and you had a sandwich that was practical, filling, and oddly satisfying. This wasn't a gourmet dish, it was a working-class solution. Slice a tomato. Spread some peanut butter on plain white or wheat bread. Press it together and eat. No mayo. No cheese. No garnish. Just two pantry staples, making do. And it worked. The creamy, slightly sweet peanut butter clung to the juicy acidity of the tomato, creating a bold contrast that some people swore by. Recipes varied from region to region, some called for toasted bread, others insisted on a fresh-from-the-vine tomato, still warm from the sun. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, sandwiches like this became the backbone of the American lunch. They didn't rely on meat, refrigeration, or expensive ingredients, just ingenuity and a willingness to try something new. Today, it's a forgotten curiosity, one of those you won't believe this existed recipes tucked into old community cookbooks and 1940s homemaking magazines. It may never make a comeback. But for those who remember it, it was summer in a sandwich. Simple, strange, and unforgettable. Long before fusion cuisine became a buzzword, there was the chicken and chutney sandwich, a bold, flavorful blend that reflected a global pantry in a single bite. Popular in mid-century tea rooms, upscale luncheons, and homemaker clubs from the 1930s through the 1960s, this sandwich mixed leftover cooked chicken with a dollop of chutney, usually sweet mango or apple, all nestled between slices of soft white bread or delicate finger rolls. But where did it come from? The roots stretch far beyond American kitchens, back to British colonial influence in India, where chutney was a household condiment. When chutneys traveled west through cookbooks and trade routes, they brought with them a sweet and spiced profile that mid-century American homemakers quickly embraced. The result? A sandwich that was both refined and exotic. The base was typically shredded roast or boiled chicken, often leftovers from a Sunday dinner, mixed with mayonnaise or cream cheese, then finished with chutney to add a burst of fruitiness and spice. Some versions added chopped celery or toasted almonds for crunch. This sandwich often appeared at ladies' luncheons, church teas, and bridge club spreads. It was considered modern, a little daring, not quite your average meat and mayo combo. Over time, as chutney became less common in American pantries, the sandwich faded into obscurity. But in old cookbooks and vintage recipe cards, it still sits proudly among the elegant sandwich options of a forgotten era. Once a symbol of worldly sophistication, now a recipe that reminds us how flavor travels, adapts, and sometimes disappears. It was dainty. It was salty. And for decades, it was everywhere, from garden parties to bridal showers, tucked neatly into trays of crustless finger sandwiches. The cream cheese and olive sandwich wasn't just a recipe, it was a social tradition. Popular from the 1920s through the 1950s, this sandwich spoke to a different side of American food history, one of refinement, gentility, and ladies who lunch. It wasn't made to feed crowds after church or to keep you full through a 12-hour shift. It was designed for linen tablecloths, crystal pitchers, and paper-thin cucumber slices. The core recipe? Simple but bold. Cream cheese, whipped until spreadable, mixed with finely chopped green olives. That's it. Sometimes a splash of olive brine was added for extra zing. Occasionally a bit of chopped pimento gave it color. Spread it thinly between soft slices of white or wheat bread, trim the crusts, and cut it into tidy triangles. No toasting. No grilling. Just delicate, cool layers of creamy, salty flavor. It became a staple at baby showers, card clubs, and even in early airplane lunch menus. Why? Because it was inexpensive, easy to prepare ahead, and kept well without needing refrigeration, perfect for bridge luncheons or train travel. But as tastes changed and processed sandwich fillings took over, think pimento cheese in jars or store-bought spreads, this quiet little sandwich faded from the spotlight. Today, it's rarely seen outside of vintage cookbooks or regional tea rooms. But once, it was a tiny symbol of hospitality, elegance, and surprisingly bold flavor. If you've ever opened a small metal can labeled Underwood, you've already met one of the oldest, most persistent sandwiches in American history. The deviled ham sandwich. This fiery little number has been around since the 1860s, when the William Underwood Company began producing preserved meats and added a punch of mustard, hot pepper, and spices to their finely ground ham to devil it. By the early 1900s, it had become a household staple. Deviled ham was shelf-stable, cheap, and versatile, perfect for a sandwich that could be slapped together in seconds, no refrigeration required. In homes, school lunchboxes, and even military rations, it was everywhere. To make the sandwich, homemakers would spread the deviled ham right from the tin onto slices of soft white bread. Some mixed it with mayo, relish, or chopped celery for texture. Others left it plain, letting the spicy, smoky flavor do the work. It was strong. It was salty. And it woke up your taste buds. This sandwich earned a reputation as the go-to for quick lunches, road trips, or emergency meals. During World War II, deviled ham was a pantry essential, and post-war, it found its way into lunch counters and office kitchens across the country. Its bold flavor was polarizing, people either loved it or left it behind. But for decades, it was a quiet powerhouse in American lunch culture. Today, deviled ham lives on in vintage lunchbox memories and retro pantry shelves. A little spicy, a little smoky, and totally forgotten by most. If the 1950s had a sandwich mascot, it just might be the pineapple and cheese sandwich, sweet, creamy, a little weird, and totally unforgettable. This wasn't a joke. This was hostess gold, especially at baby showers, summer luncheons, and ladies' tea tables. The idea was simple but daring: canned pineapple, usually rings or crushed, paired with sharp cheddar or creamy processed cheese, layered between slices of soft bread. Sometimes toasted, sometimes chilled. But always, oddly delicious. So how did this happen? In post-war America, canned fruit became a sign of modern convenience and hospitality. Pineapple, especially from Hawaii, was exotic, festive, and considered a treat in many households. Cheese added richness and body, creating a surprisingly balanced bite of sweet and salty. Mid-century cookbooks are full of versions. Right arrow crushed pineapple mixed into cream cheese. Right arrow pineapple slices topped with melted cheddar on toast. right arrow, or the famous pineapple sandwich, just mayo, pineapple, and bread made even richer with a slice of cheese. It showed up in picnic baskets, church socials, and even children's lunchboxes, a proud symbol of the era's experimental, no-rules food culture. Today, it might sound outlandish. But back then? It was fun. It was different. And it was a hit. A true taste of vintage Americana, where flavor combos didn't need to make sense. They just needed to make people smile. Sweet. Sharp. Simple. The apple and cheddar sandwich may sound like a gourmet cafe creation today. But it actually comes from deep, old-school American food roots. In colonial kitchens and farmhouse tables, pairing cheese with fruit wasn't a trend, it was tradition. Apples were easy to store through winter, and cheddar was one of the most common household cheeses. Together, they created a balance of tart and tangy that was both nourishing and comforting. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this combo had made its way into the sandwich format. Especially in rural areas, school lunch pails often held a thick slice of sharp cheddar and fresh apple tucked between crusty bread or a biscuit, no refrigeration needed, and no fuss required. It wasn't just tasty, it was practical. The most common version used thin slices of crisp apple, usually tart varieties like Granny Smith or Winesap, paired with aged cheddar. Some homemakers added a swipe of butter, a drizzle of honey, or even a touch of mustard to round out the flavors. And when fall rolled around and apple harvests came in, this sandwich was everywhere, from farmhouse kitchens to one-room schoolhouses. By the 1950s, it appeared in community cookbooks as a rustic lunch option, and in some cases, even served grilled for a golden, melty twist. But as processed sandwich meats and spreads took over, this simple pairing began to disappear from daily life, remembered mostly as something Grandma used to make. Today, it's quietly resurfacing in artisanal cafes. But in truth, it never needed a comeback. It was always quietly perfect, just waiting to be remembered. You won't find it in a deli today. But once upon a time, the Bologna and Slo sandwich was a lunchtime legend, crisp, creamy, and built to satisfy on the cheap. It rose to fame in the 1940s and 50s, when bologna was the go-to meat for millions of American families. Affordable, salty, and easy to slice, it was often called the poor man's ham, but that didn't mean it lacked flavor. And when you piled it high with a scoop of creamy coleslaw, that's when the magic happened. This wasn't a sandwich for the fancy crowd, it was built for factory workers, truck stops, and school cafeterias. Thick slices of bologna, either cold or lightly fried, laid onto soft white bread or a hamburger bun. Then came the Slo, homemade or store-bought, full of shredded cabbage, carrots, and tangy mayo dressing. The result? A sandwich with balance, the chew of the bologna, the crunch of the Slo, the zing of vinegar and pepper, all layered together in a messy, satisfying bite. It was a Southern staple, especially popular at roadside diners and family reunions. Some versions added mustard. Others used barbecue sauce or pickles. But the base remained the same, meat and slaw, stacked and squished between two slices of soft bread. It faded with time as deli meats diversified and coleslaw became more of a side dish than a topping. But back then, this sandwich was more than a meal. It was a reminder that even humble ingredients could deliver big flavor. No frills. No waste. Just pure, crunchy comfort. Soft. Cool. Refined. The cucumber and cream cheese tea sandwich wasn't designed to fill you up. It was made to elevate an afternoon. Borrowed from British tea traditions and embraced by early 20th century America, this dainty little sandwich became a symbol of elegance, showing up at bridal showers, garden parties, and ladies' luncheons from coast to coast. The formula? Simple, but never careless. Start with paper-thin slices of fresh cucumber, peeled, chilled, and sometimes lightly salted. Then add a smooth layer of cream cheese, often mixed with dill, chives, or a hint of lemon zest. Press it all between slices of crustless white bread, and cut into neat triangles or little fingers. No grilling. No mess. Just quiet luxury on a plate. By the 1920s and 30s, the cucumber and cream cheese sandwich had earned its place in community cookbooks and etiquette guides. It wasn't a working man's lunch, it was for Sunday teas, club meetings, and ladies' auxiliaries. A bite-sized symbol of sophistication, where presentation mattered as much as flavor. Some versions used pumpernickel or rye. Others swapped cream cheese for butter. But the spirit remained the same, light, crisp, and impeccably tidy. As tastes changed and formal teas faded from fashion, the sandwich slowly slipped into the background, remembered mostly in vintage etiquette books and old recipe cards tucked in wooden drawers. Yet for those who recall it, this wasn't just a snack, it was a ritual. A small, perfect pause in the middle of a busy world. Before tuna ruled the lunchbox, there was the salmon salad sandwich, a creamy, protein-packed staple that once held top billing in American kitchens. Long before fresh salmon became a luxury item, canned salmon was the hero of the pantry. Cheap, shelf-stable, and loaded with nutrients, it became a go-to ingredient during the Great Depression, wartime rationing, and well into the 1950s. Home cooks would drain a can, flake the salmon, and mix it with chopped celery, sweet pickle relish, a little onion, and plenty of mayonnaise. Some added hard-boiled egg. Others used lemon juice or mustard for extra zip. Served cold on soft sandwich bread or tucked into a bun, it was quick, filling, and surprisingly elegant. This sandwich wasn't just popular in lunchboxes, it was a fixture at funeral receptions, baby showers, and church luncheons, where platters of salmon salad sandwiches were made in bulk and cut into neat little triangles. In the Pacific Northwest, where canned salmon was especially abundant, it became almost a regional trademark. And in post-war America, it offered a bit of fancy without the fancy price. Over time, tuna salad stole the spotlight, easier to find, milder in taste, and better suited to processed sandwich culture. But the salmon salad sandwich? It never truly disappeared. It just slipped out of the spotlight, tucked into the pages of vintage cookbooks and the memories of quiet kitchens. Because this was more than just a lunch. It was pantry wisdom, creamy, thrifty, and full of flavor. It's creamy. It's tangy. And in the American South, it's practically a birthright. The pimento cheese sandwich wasn't just a recipe, it was a ritual. A lunchtime legend that spread from humble kitchen counters to church picnics, soda fountains, and even Masters golf tournaments. But where did it begin? The origins trace back to the early 1900s, when processed cheese and canned pimentos, sweet, mild red peppers from Spain, became widely available. Home cooks began mixing cheddar, mayo, and chopped pimentos into a vibrant orange spread that packed a punch. By the 1920s and 30s, it was showing up in lunch pails across the South, smeared thick between slices of white bread, sometimes with pickles, lettuce, or just plain and proud. It was cheap, didn't spoil fast, and was endlessly adaptable. Need to stretch it? Add cream cheese. Want some heat? A dash of hot sauce or cayenne. Craving crunch? Fold and chop celery or diced onion. By mid-century, you could find it in grocery stores, diners, and soda counters, even sealed in plastic triangles in factory vending machines. But real pimento cheese? That was made at home. And every family had their own version, fiercely guarded, always praised, and never measured. Today, it's sometimes dismissed as retro. But in truth, it's a time capsule. A spread that tells the story of creativity, comfort, and community. This wasn't just a sandwich, it was tradition between two slices of bread. Bold. Bright. Unapologetically Southern. Before bacon became a burger topping or a viral internet meme, it was quietly paired with something unexpected: green apple. Yes, the bacon and green apple sandwich may sound like a chef's invention, but it actually came from old-school resourcefulness. During the 1940s and 50s, when home cooks relied on pantry staples and whatever was growing out back, this sandwich was a stroke of genius. Just a few strips of salty bacon, sometimes leftover from breakfast, layered with thin slices of tart green apple, usually Granny Smith, all tucked between slices of toasted bread. No cheese. No dressing. Just contrast, crisp against chewy, smoky against sour. It was a sandwich built on balance. Many versions added a swipe of butter or honey mustard. Some included watercress or arugula for a peppery bite. But even plain, it delivered a flavor that felt fresh, clever, and oddly refined. This sandwich popped up in vintage picnic guides, homemaker magazines, and even junior league cookbooks from the 1950s. It wasn't fancy, but it felt special. Why? Because it turned humble ingredients into something unexpected. Something that woke up your lunch routine. And like so many old recipes, it faded over time, buried beneath deli meats, processed cheese, and fast food culture. But it's still there, crisp, smoky, and quietly brilliant in the pages of forgotten cookbooks, waiting for someone to bring it back. Because sometimes, the best ideas are the ones that never tried too hard. It was strong. It was unapologetic. And for decades, it was a sandwich that didn't whisper, it shouted. The liverwurst and mustard sandwich was once a lunchtime regular in immigrant neighborhoods, small-town diners, and butcher shop counters across mid-century America. Liverwurst, also known as Braunschweiger, came from German and Eastern European culinary traditions. Made from finely ground pork liver, fat, and spices, it was rich, smooth, and packed with nutrients. Spreadable, affordable, and deeply flavorful. Add a sharp swipe of yellow mustard or spicy brown if you had it, and press it between slices of rye, sourdough, or plain sandwich bread. No lettuce. No tomato. No fuss. This was a sandwich built on bold simplicity, a working-class staple that delivered real flavor with every bite. It became especially popular from the 1930s through the 1960s, when delis, lunch counters, and home kitchens embraced cold cuts and charcuterie-style meats. For many first-generation American families, liverwurst was a taste of home and a proud reminder of culinary heritage. In some homes, it was dressed up with sliced onion or pickles. In others, it was eaten open-faced with crackers and a cold drink. But over time, liverwurst fell out of fashion, replaced by milder deli meats and processed sandwich fillers. What was once a proud, flavorful tradition slowly faded from the mainstream. Today, it's a relic rarely seen, often misunderstood. But for those who remember it, the liverwurst and mustard sandwich wasn't just lunch. It was culture, history, and full-bodied flavor, no apologies. It was rich. It was smooth. And in its heyday, the chicken liver pâté sandwich was considered the height of refined, old-world flavor, whether you were dining in a city apartment or a rural farmhouse kitchen. Long before hummus and avocado toast took over modern spreads, pâté was the go-to gourmet. Especially chicken liver, cheap, nutritious, and easy to turn into something that felt decadent. This sandwich rose to quiet popularity in the 1940s and 50s, influenced by French and Eastern European cooking traditions. Homemakers would sauté chicken livers with onion, garlic, butter, and herbs, then blend it into a creamy, savory paste. The result? An intensely flavorful spread that paired perfectly with dark rye, pumpernickel, or toast points. And when chilled, it held its shape, making it ideal for sandwiches packed ahead of time. Many recipes added a splash of brandy or sherry for depth, or a hard-boiled egg for silkiness. Some households even passed down their own secret blend, a tradition of thrift wrapped in elegance. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But for generations, it was quietly served at cocktail parties, luncheons, and family tables. A bridge between high cuisine and home comfort. As processed lunch meats rose in popularity, and tastes drifted toward milder flavors, pâté quietly disappeared from most American kitchens. But in dusty cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards, the memory lives on of a sandwich that turned scraps into sophistication. Because sometimes, the most forgotten flavors carried the most soul. It was crispy, savory, and born from survival. The Scrapple sandwich may sound unfamiliar today. But for early Americans, it was a breakfast hero and later, a forgotten lunchbox staple. Scrapple came out of the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, a thrifty blend of pork scraps, cornmeal, and spices, all cooked down into a loaf, chilled, and sliced. Then fried until golden brown on the outside, soft on the inside. And when tucked into a sandwich, it was a working man's dream, warm, hearty, and deeply satisfying. These sandwiches became popular in the mid-Atlantic and parts of the South from the late 1800s through the 1950s. You'd find them served on toast or a biscuit, often with a fried egg, mustard, or even apple butter, depending on the region. Why Scrapple? Because nothing was wasted. Every part of the pig was used, and Scrapple turned what others threw away into something comforting and craveable. It was especially beloved by farmers and factory workers, high in calories, low in cost, and easy to make ahead. A slice of Scrapple between bread and wrapped in wax paper? That was breakfast to go for thousands of families. But over time, Scrapple earned a reputation as old-fashioned or even mysterious, and as processed meats and fast food breakfasts took over, it faded from everyday menus. Still, for those who grew up with it, the Scrapple sandwich is more than food, it's memory. A reminder that some of the best things come from the humblest beginnings. Before plant-based eating had a name, there was the fried eggplant and mayo sandwich, a simple, crispy creation pulled straight from backyard gardens in cast-iron skillets. This sandwich was never flashy, but it was everywhere in the 1930s through the 1950s, especially in farming towns, Italian-American homes, and Depression-era kitchens where meat was scarce and creativity was survival. Eggplant grew fast and in abundance. Slice it thin, dredge it in flour or cornmeal, then pan-fry it to a golden crisp. Stack those hot slices onto soft sandwich bread, spread with a generous layer of mayonnaise, and if you had it, maybe a leaf of lettuce or a sprinkle of salt. The contrast was everything. Crunchy edges and creamy centers. Savory fried flavor with cool, tangy mayo. It was humble, but so satisfying. In some households, eggplant was salted and drained first to remove bitterness. Others used leftover fried slices cold, packed into wax paper for work lunches the next day. For many immigrant families, especially in the South and Northeast, this sandwich was comfort food. A vegetarian dish long before the word ever reached cookbooks. But like many garden-grown favorites, it faded as processed meats, frozen dinners, and fast food took over the American table. Today, it's rarely seen outside of old community cookbooks and family kitchens. But once, the fried eggplant and mayo sandwich was proof that you didn't need meat to make something memorable. Just a plant, a pan, and a little pride. Sweet. Salty. Surprisingly elegant. The raisin bread and ham sandwich was once the darling of vintage tea rooms and fancy luncheons, a flavor combination that dared to be different, and won hearts doing it. It sounds unusual today, savory ham paired with fruity, spiced bread? But in the 1940s through the 1960s, it was considered stylish, clever, and just adventurous enough to feel modern. Here's how it worked. Take slices of soft raisin bread, often with hints of cinnamon or nutmeg. Layer on thin-cut baked ham, preferably cold and lightly salty. Some versions added a smear of mustard or cream cheese, while others kept it simple, just meat and bread. The raisins brought bursts of sweetness that balanced the ham's saltiness, while the soft texture of the bread created a tender, almost melt-in-your-mouth bite. You'd find it served in luncheon clubs, ladies' auxiliaries, and mid-century cookbooks under sections titled Sandwiches for Entertaining. This wasn't a rugged lunch, it was crafted to impress. Some homemakers even cut them into tiny triangles or pinwheels for presentation, pairing them with fruit salads, gelatin molds, or tea. But as flavor trends grew more conventional and savory sweet combos fell out of fashion, the raisin bread and ham sandwich quietly vanished from menus. Still, for those who remember it, this sandwich wasn't just about taste, it was about imagination. Taking two everyday ingredients and creating something unexpectedly special. It was rich. It was briny. And for decades, the sardine and egg salad sandwich stood proudly on lunch tables from coast to coast. At first glance, it sounds intense, and it was. But in the early to mid-20th century, this sandwich was a go-to for families who needed nutrition, not novelty. Canned sardines were inexpensive, loaded with protein, calcium, and healthy fats. Add in chopped hard-boiled eggs and a spoonful of mayonnaise, and you had a creamy, flavorful spread that stretched ingredients and filled bellies. The combination was popular among working-class households, especially during the Great Depression and World War II rationing years. When meat was scarce, this sandwich delivered everything the body needed without relying on the butcher shop. Some recipes added a little relish, mustard, or chopped onion for bite. Others mashed everything together and chilled it before spreading it onto slices of white or rye bread. Served cold, it was easy to pack and perfect for long workdays or school lunches. It showed up often in 1930s lunch menus, 1950s church cookbooks, and even wartime nutrition guides. Because despite its humble ingredients, it worked. But over time, sardines fell out of favor in American kitchens, replaced by tuna, deli meats, and smoother, milder flavors. Egg salad survived. Sardines? Not so much. Still, for those who remember, the sardine and egg salad sandwich was more than a recipe. It was a moment in history when resourcefulness met bold taste, and the pantry was the most important tool in the kitchen. It crunched. It crumbled. And for millions of kids and lunchbox-carrying workers, it was pure magic. The bologna and potato chip sandwich wasn't born in a cookbook, it was born at the kitchen table, probably by a kid who got creative one afternoon. At its core, it was classic American lunch. 2 slices of soft white bread, 1 or 2 cold cuts of bologna, and a generous handful of crushed potato chips smashed right into the sandwich for that perfect salty crunch. No cooking. No prep. Just instinct. This sandwich exploded in popularity in the 1950s through the 1980s, when bologna was the king of lunch meats and potato chips came in wax paper bags with grease stains and crinkle cuts. It was cheap. It was fast. And it turned a plain sandwich into something loud, exciting, and fun to eat. Some versions added American cheese, mayo, or a squirt of yellow mustard. But the true heart of the sandwich was always the crunch factor, that surprising, rebellious texture that made every bite a little bit different. In school cafeterias, brown bag lunches, and factory break rooms, this sandwich became an unspoken classic. A comfort food. A secret handshake between generations. Today, you'll rarely see it listed on menus, but it lives on in memory, especially for those who grew up in mid-century America. Because this wasn't just a sandwich. It was a moment, that perfect second when salty, soft, and crispy came together in one glorious bite. It was smoky. It was sharp. And once upon a time, the smoked trout and horseradish sandwich was a hidden gem on the American lunch table, bridging rustic tradition and refined taste. Smoked trout was a favorite in early 20th century America, especially in regions near rivers and lakes where trout fishing was both a pastime and a way of life. Once smoked over hardwood, the fish became rich, salty, and preserved, ready to be used in spreads, salads, and sandwiches. Pair that with freshly grated horseradish either mixed into cream or mustard, and you had a sandwich with bite. A bold, briny, smoky blend that hit every taste bud. Usually served on dark rye, pumpernickel, or dense homemade bread, This sandwich was popular in German, Scandinavian, and Appalachian communities, where smoked fish and strong condiments were part of everyday eating. It wasn't for the faint of heart, but it was deeply flavorful. Some added sliced cucumbers, pickled onions, or dill. Others kept it simple, just flaky smoked trout and a layer of horseradish cream between bread. By the 1940s, versions of this sandwich appeared in small-town cafes, fish camp menus, and even cocktail parties, where it was sometimes served as open-faced hors d'oeuvres. But as commercial tuna and chicken salad took over American sandwiches, smoked fish lost its spot at the table. What was once a riverside delicacy became a forgotten memory tucked inside heritage cookbooks and family recipe boxes. Today, it's a rare find. But one bite takes you back to misty mornings, crackling smokers, and bold flavors that didn't ask for attention, they earned it. Before peanut butter ruled the pantry, there was the date and nut sandwich, a naturally sweet, satisfyingly chewy treat that once felt downright fancy. Popular from the 1910s through the 1950s, this sandwich wasn't made to be hearty, it was made to be delightful. You'd find it at Sunday teas, garden clubs, and especially in ladies' luncheons, where subtle flavors and delicate presentation were everything. The filling was a blend of chopped dates and finely crushed walnuts or pecans, often mixed with a bit of cream cheese or butter to hold it all together. Pressed between slices of raisin bread or soft white sandwich bread, the result was soft, sticky, and just sweet enough. Some versions added orange zest or a pinch of cinnamon. Others used brown sugar to deepen the flavor. And in the South? It sometimes showed up on mini biscuits at church receptions, one bite and gone. For many households, it was also a favorite during Christmas or Easter, when dried fruits were common pantry staples and meatless meals were traditional. But over time, the date and nut sandwich faded. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't savory. And it didn't fit the growing obsession with fast, salty, protein-packed lunches. Yet for those who remember it, it's a taste of warmth, of childhood, of a time when sandwiches didn't have to shout, they simply offered comfort and charm, one soft, sweet bite at a time. This wasn't just food. It was a little celebration between slices of bread. No meat. No cheese. Just leaves and butter, and somehow, it was perfect. The watercress and butter sandwich is a relic of quiet refinement, a favorite of Victorian tea rooms, early American garden luncheons, and ladies' socials from the late 1800s through the 1930s. Watercress, once a common garden green and a forager's delight, brought a sharp, peppery bite like arugula's older, more elegant cousin. And when paired with nothing more than a layer of softened, salted butter on thin white or wheat bread, the flavors sang. This sandwich was all about contrast. The cool crunch of fresh-cooked cress, the creamy richness of real butter, and the delicacy of crustless, triangle-cut bread. It was served at high teas, bridal showers, and quiet lunches on shaded porches. Not filling, but intentional. A dish that let its ingredients speak quietly, but clearly. For working-class families who grew watercress in backyard streams or gathered it near creeks, this sandwich was also a simple pleasure, a way to elevate humble ingredients with elegance. Some recipes added lemon zest. Others used herbed butter or rye bread. But the spirit stayed the same, minimalism with meaning. As heavy meats and processed fillings took over American sandwiches in the post-war decades, the watercress and butter combo faded, too light, too subtle, too old-fashioned for modern appetites. But it remains a beautiful reminder that sometimes, flavor doesn't come from layers. It comes from letting nature speak for itself. It was rich. It was fiery. And it was once considered the power sandwich of its time. The roast beef and horseradish cream sandwich didn't whisper flavor, it delivered it in bold, confident bites. It first rose to popularity in the early 1900s, when slow-roasted beef was a Sunday tradition. But what to do with the leftovers? You sliced them thin, piled them high, and gave them a jolt of sharp horseradish cream, a sauce with roots in English taverns and Jewish delis alike. The horseradish, grated fresh or spooned from a jar, was often mixed with sour cream, heavy cream, or even mayonnaise. The result? A cooling, spicy spread that cut through the richness of cold roast beef like a knife. Sandwiched between rye, sourdough, or a crusty roll, it became a hearty lunch, perfect for factory workers, travelers, or anyone who needed something serious to eat. It wasn't fancy, but it felt substantial. It showed up in railroad dining cars, butcher shop menus, and country club luncheons alike. Some versions added arugula, caramelized onions, or cheddar, but purists kept it simple: meat and heat. Over the decades, as deli meats took over and homemade roasts became rare, this sandwich lost its prime spot at the lunch table. But in its prime? It was the kind of sandwich that made you sit up straight. Because the roast beef and horseradish sandwich didn't just feed you. It woke you up. It reminded you that flavor could have attitude. It was humble. It was hearty. And it might just be the greatest leftover sandwich ever invented. The cold meatloaf sandwich didn't need reinvention, it was born perfect. Thick slices of yesterday's meatloaf, chilled and firm, slapped between two slices of bread. No reheating. No fuss. Just bold flavor and working-class brilliance. From the 1930s through the 1970s, this sandwich was a lunchbox champion, especially in factory towns, farmhouses, and suburban kitchens where meatloaf was a weekly staple. Most versions were simple. White sandwich bread. A cold slab of meatloaf. Maybe a touch of ketchup, mustard, or leftover gravy if you were lucky. Sometimes even a slice of cheese or a pickle snuck in. But the core never changed: soft, savory meat, firm enough to hold its shape, rich enough to carry a meal. It was comfort between slices. And it didn't pretend to be anything else. Meatloaf itself was already a budget-conscious dish, stretching ground meat with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and spices. But as a cold sandwich? It became something more, something portable, practical, and deeply satisfying. For kids, it meant mom had planned ahead. For dads on lunch break, it meant no-nonsense fuel for the rest of the day. And yet, as fast food took over and leftovers became microwave meals, the cold meatloaf sandwich slowly disappeared from lunchboxes and menus alike. But for those who remember, one bite brings it all back. Warm memories from a cold slice and a reminder that greatness doesn't need to be reheated. It was salty. It was tangy. And in its heyday, the chipped beef and pickle sandwich was a kitchen cupboard classic, equal parts convenience and crunch. Chipped beef, those thin, dried slices of salted beef in glass jars, was a Depression-era pantry hero. It required no refrigeration, lasted forever, and packed a big punch of flavor in tiny shreds. Originally used for creamed beef on toast in military mess halls, it quickly made its way into home kitchens, especially for those looking to stretch a protein on a budget. But paired with dill pickles? That's where things got interesting. The recipe was simple. Tear or chop the chipped beef into pieces, sometimes soaked to reduce the saltiness, then layer it onto white bread with a few slices of sharp dill pickle. Add a swipe of mustard or a pat of butter, and you had a sandwich that was quick, bracingly flavorful, and surprisingly satisfying. Popular from the 1930s through the 1960s, this sandwich became a favorite in lunch pails, farmhouse kitchens, and school cafeterias. It traveled well, didn't spoil quickly, and delivered real flavor without needing a fridge or a stove. For many, it was a childhood classic, the kind of thing your grandma whipped up without a recipe, always with a sparkle of pride in making something from almost nothing. But as fresh meats became more accessible and tastes shifted, chipped beef was quietly pushed off the shelves, and this sandwich went with it. Still, for those who remember, that salty beef and snappy pickle bite wasn't just lunch. It was a little reminder that resourcefulness had a flavor and it was unforgettable. It was tangy. It was sweet. And for decades, the sweet pickle and bologna sandwich was an American lunchbox staple, strange to some, perfectly normal to others. Bologna, the king of cold cuts, was cheap, flexible, and everywhere by the mid-20th century. But when you paired it with sliced sweet pickles, something oddly magical happened. That sugary brine from the pickles cut through the salty meat just enough to make every bite a blend of creamy, crunchy, and sweet-sour surprise. Kids loved it. Adults depended on it. And lunch tables from the 1950s through the 1980s often included this no-cook classic, sometimes with a slice of American cheese, sometimes with mayo or mustard, but always with attitude. It was part of a generation that wasn't afraid to mix flavors and didn't care if it sounded weird, as long as it tasted good. But as lunch meats got fancier and sandwiches got more serious, this playful combo quietly vanished from most menus, replaced by sleek paninis and pre-packed deli wraps. Still, for those who grew up on it, the sweet pickle and bologna sandwich was more than a meal. It was childhood between two slices of bread. And there you have it, 30 forgotten sandwiches pulled from dusty cookbooks, faded recipe cards, and America's flavorful past. Some were bold. Some were odd. But each one told a story of thrift, tradition, and imagination. If you made it this far, you're not just hungry, you're a true food history explorer. So don't forget to subscribe, because we're just getting started. The next recipe might be even stranger. Or better yet, just like Grandma used to make.